All right, let's dive in. Today we're tackling B2B sales. And I got to say, even just glancing at the sources you send over, it's clear there's a lot more to it than meets the eye.
Yeah, it's funny how we often just lump all B2B sales together, like it's all the same. But when you really think about it, the tactics you'd use for, say, selling software are completely different from what work when you're trying to land a major consulting gig.
Totally. And one of these sources breaks it down into 4 types of B2B sales. They call them typology. And they make a really strong case that knowing which type you're dealing with is like step 1 before you even think about strategy.
Right, so the first one they talk about is the solution sale. This is where you're basically working with the client to create a custom solution every step of the way. Lots of stakeholders involved, complex negotiations, usually a longer sales cycle.
So you've got a company like Palantir. They're not just selling software. They're working with intelligence agencies to develop totally new ways to process and interpret information. Super high stakes, super complex.
Exactly. And then you have the transactional expertise sale. This is where the focus is on specialized knowledge or a really high-value product. The customization might not be as intense as a full-blown solution sale, but the technical expertise you need to close the deal, that's huge.
Like the source uses the example of a cybersecurity firm, CrowdStrike. They're not just selling antivirus software. They're selling their expertise in threat detection and incident response. So they're dealing with CIOs, security experts, people who really know their stuff.
Right, they have to prove themselves. Now, the value sale, this one's interesting. It's all about zeroing in on a very specific problem and offering a pretty straightforward.
And the example they use is perfect. Think Zoom. They didn't create some crazy new technology. They just made video conferencing easy and accessible. Solved a real problem in a simple, powerful way.
Exactly, meta need. Then we have the last one, transactional straightforward sale. This is all about efficiency and price.
So something like Shopify makes it super easy for anyone to set up an online store. Ease of use, affordability. Not so much about deep customization. So even just seeing these 4 types laid out like that, it's amazing how obvious it becomes that your sales tactics need to change depending on which situation you're in.
No question. You're spot on. And this kind of leads into something else one of the sources digs into, the whole idea of selling expertise, which is a totally different game from selling a product, something tangible.
Yeah, okay, let's talk about that because honestly, that's the part that really got me thinking. This source basically argues that how you sell your expertise, it's like a sample of the expertise itself.
Right. Imagine like a chef giving you a taste of their signature dish, before you commit to the whole meal. That little taste tells you a lot about their skill, right? Same idea here.
I like that. So if you're a consultant and you're all over the place and disorganized during the sales process, well, that kind of makes people wonder if you can actually handle a complex project, right?
Exactly. And it's even more important in fields like finance, law, areas where trust is everything.
Oh, for sure.
Yeah.
Like if a financial advisor is pushing some risky investment scheme without even figuring out your risk tolerance, well, that's a giant red flag.
Definitely a sign to run the other way. A true expert, they focus on building that trust, showing their knowledge, not on high-pressure sales tactics.
This source actually says, you won't be seen as an expert unless you truly believe in your own expertise.
It's got to come from a genuine place. If you're not sure of yourself, it shows, and that's going to undermine your credibility.
And that takes us to another big idea from these sources, consultative selling. This seems to be more and more important these days, especially when you're selling expertise. What are your thoughts on that?
Absolutely. Consultative selling is all about being that trusted advisor, someone who really understands what the client needs and can guide them to the right solution, even if it means, saying, hey, maybe this product isn't right for you.
Right. So it's less about being that pushy salesperson, more about collaborating and problem solving.
Exactly. It's about understanding their problems, asking the right questions, and working together to find the best way forward.
So let's say you're selling some complex software. You're not just talking about features. You're digging into their processes, finding their pain points, showing how this software can help them reach their goals.
And that's where the power of the discovery phase comes in.
Yeah, that's something that comes up a lot in these sources, how important it is to master the discovery phase. But what does that actually look like in practice?
So one of the sources gives some really practical advice on that, and it starts with building rapport.
Like making a genuine connection.
Exactly. They even mention something called the icebreaker technique. Basically, going beyond the usual small talk, finding a real connection, showing you're interested in them as a person.
That makes sense. This source also talks about how important it is to show you've done your homework. You come prepared. You understand their company, their industry, their challenges. It builds that credibility.
It's like a doctor, right? They take the time to look at your medical history before making a diagnosis. Shows they care. Shows they're taking it seriously.
And speaking of doctors, this source uses that analogy too. Consultative selling. It's like a doctor diagnosing a patient.
I was just thinking that. You're not just pushing products, you're listening, you're asking the right questions, you're figuring out the root cause of the problem.
So instead of some prepackaged solution, you're helping them figure out what they really need.
Exactly. And then you can guide them to the best course of action. And that brings us to another key part of discovery, active listening.
It seems like that's crucial for any good salesperson, but especially for consultative selling.
Absolutely. It's about really listening to what the client's saying, asking questions, clarify, making sure you see things from their side.
So you let them talk. You encourage them to share their concern. You become someone they feel like they can trust.
It's all about creating a safe space for them to open up. Then, once you've built that trust, you can start asking more targeted questions to figure out their specific needs and pain points.
That's where a framework like step buy and selling comes in, right? I've heard a lot about that technique.
Steps buy and selling is super effective, especially with a consultative approach. It stands for situation, problem, implication, and need payoff.
I know the acronym, but I'm curious to hear how you've seen it play out in real life.
So imagine you're working with, let's say, a manufacturing company, and they're having all these problems with their supply chain. With Sespan, you start by asking about their situation. Like, tell me about your current processes. What are the biggest challenges you're facing? Just getting a lay of the land.
So you establish that baseline.
Okay.
Then you move to problem question, like what impact are these disruptions having on your production, or what are the financial implications? You're digging into those pain points.
So you're not just asking about the problem itself, but the consequences too. Exactly. Then you go deeper with implication questions, like what happens if these disruptions continue? Will you be able to meet demand? Could it hurt your reputation? Helping them see the bigger picture.
That's powerful. Creates a sense of urgency without being pushy.
Right. It's just guiding them through a logical process. Okay, so now they've laid out the problem, the impact, consequence. What's next?
Need payoff.
Exactly. Now you shift solution. Help them see the benefit. So you might ask, if you could get rid of these disruptions, how would that improve your efficiency? What would it mean for your bottom line, your relationships with customers?
So you're guiding them towards recognizing the need and painting a picture of how things could be better.
Exactly. And the beauty of this is you're not telling them what they need. They're discovering it themselves.
And that feels much more empowering, right?
Sure.
They're not just being sold to. They're part of the process.
100%. That's one of the key benefits of selling. It's collaborative, consultative, builds that trust and those long-term relationships.
Which takes us back to that idea of being the trusted advisor, right? You're not just there to close the deal. You're there to help them find the best solution.
That's what it's all about. And that's really what separates the good salespeople from the great ones in B2B, especially now.
So we've covered a lot. Those 4 B2B sales typologies, selling expertise, consultative selling, but there's still more to unpack, right?
Yeah, we've just scratched the surface. There's a lot more to explore, especially when it comes to closing the deal and building those long-term relationships.
It's kind of crazy how much there is to unpack here. We've already talked about so many different approaches to B2B sales, but I feel like we're just getting started.
Right, and that's what makes this deep dive so interesting. There's always more to learn, especially when it comes to, actually closing the deal and then building those relationships that last.
Absolutely. One of these sources really focuses on the psychology of closing, and I gotta say, some of it's pretty surprising.
What stood out to me was how important it is to recognize what they call buying signal. It's not always like some big obvious thing. Sometimes it's little cues that tell you they're ready.
They actually give this great example. So imagine you're selling some marketing automation platform, and the prospect starts asking all these detailed questions about how it integrates with their CRM.
That's a big one, because it means they're already thinking about how it would fit into their operations. They're not just interested, they're starting to actually use.
Right. Another signal they talk about is when the prospect starts asking about budget or timeline. Seems like a basic question, but it means they're getting serious about making a commitment.
And that's when you know it's time to guide them to close. This source has some really smart techniques for that part.
So one thing they suggest is summarizing the key benefit, not just repeating everything you said, but highlighting the points that really resonated with them, connecting it back to their need.
It's like you're telling a story, reminding them why this is the right fit.
They also talk about reiterating the value proposition, not just features and benefits, but the real value you bring.
It's like, why should they choose you? What makes you different? What problem are you solving for them?
And then, of course, you need a clear call to action. You've built rapport, you've answered their questions, you've shown the value. Now it's time to guide them to that decision.
Sometimes it's as simple as saying, are you ready to move forward? Or let's schedule another meeting to finalize the detail.
But what about when there are still some concerns? This source doesn't shy away from that. It's not always going to be a smooth ride.
Totally. And they say it's super important to address those objections like right away. Be open and honest.
So you acknowledge their concerns, you validate how they're feeling, and then you offer a solution or maybe some compromise.
It shows you're flexible and you're really committed to making it work for them.
So if they're worried about, say, the implementation timeline, you could offer to create a custom plan for them or provide extra support during that transition phase.
You're going the extra mile.
The goal is to make sure everyone wins. It's not just about getting that signature on the contract. It's about building a good relationship.
A partnership, really. Which leads us to another thing these sources talk about, following up after the sale. It's easy to think your job is done once the deal is...
Right. But this source makes a really good point about why following up is so important. It's about making sure things go smoothly, answering any questions, and reminding them of the value you're bringing.
It's about exceeding expectations, showing them you care about their success, even after the deal is done.
They even suggest having regular check-in calls, not just to deal with problems, but to find ways to improve things and make sure you're still meeting their need.
It turns a one-time transaction into a real partnership. You're not just a vendor, you're a trusted advisor, someone they can rely on.
That's a big shift in how we think about sales. It's not just about closing deals, it's about building those relationships that last.
And it's those relationships that really make the difference in the long run. They build loyalty and they lead to more success for everyone.
I think that's one of the biggest things I'm taking away from this deep dive.
Yeah.
We need to shift our mindset from selling to helping. Become that trusted advisor, that problem solver, someone who's invested in their success.
It's a change in perspective that can make a huge impact, not just in how we approach sales, but in how we build relationships and create value in the B2B world in general.
It's amazing how much ground we've covered when it comes to B2B sales. I'm definitely feeling more equipped to navigate this whole world now. How about you?
Oh, absolutely. You know, what I really appreciate about this deep dive is that we haven't just been skimming the surface with those, typical sales tips. We've really gotten into the nitty-gritty of the strategy, the relationship building, the things that really matter in the long run.
Yeah, I know what you mean. And that breakdown of those 4 types of B2B sales, I'm telling you, that's going to stick with me. Solution, transactional expertise, value, and transactional. Straightforward. It's like a mental cheat sheet I can use to quickly figure out what kind of situation I'm dealing with.
That's the point, right? Because your whole approach changes depending on whether you're building a custom solution for some giant company or if you're focused on, price and efficiency for something more straightforward.
You got it. Like that example of Palantir working with those intelligence agencies. Talk about a solution sale. It's a whole different ballgame from, say, a small business setting up shop on Shopify.
And even within those type, there are so many nuances. We talked about CrowdStrike, right? Selling cybersecurity expertise, definitely a transactional expertise sale, but they're also using that consultative approach to build trust and show that they get the client security needs.
Like they're mixing and matching the best of both worlds. They're the expert, but they're also those trusted advisors who can help the clients figure out the best strategy.
And that's what makes this so interesting. It's not about sticking to just one approach. It's about adapting, being flexible. You got to tailor your strategy to each situation.
That makes a lot of sense. Adaptability. Seems like that's a big theme in all these sources we've been looking at. Reading the room, understanding what the client wants, and then adjusting how you approach them.
It all goes back to being that trusted advisor. You don't just need to know your stuff. You need to understand their business, their problems, what they're trying to achieve. Then you can offer advice and solutions that actually work for them.
I keep thinking about that chef analogy, offering a taste of their signature dish. It really hit home for me. Every interaction is a chance to show what you know, from that first conversation to the follow-up after the sale.
And it's got to be done right. You want to project confidence, but not come across as arrogant. You want to give them information, but not overwhelm them. Be helpful, but not pushy.
It's a fine line. And I guess figuring out how to walk that line is what makes all the difference. At least that's what makes a great B2B sales.
No doubt about it. And one tool that can help is that SBN selling framework we talked about. It's a structured way to figure out what the client needs and guide them to solution, but it's also collaborative. It feels like you're working.
I love that example you gave with the manufacturing company, the ones struggling with those supply chain disruptions. By asking those really specific questions about their situation, the problem, what it all means, you're helping them really understand those challenges, and they start to see how things differ.
It's that process of figuring things out together that makes the client feel empowered, and that's how you build those strong relationships.
You're not just selling them something, you're partnering with them to overcome obstacles and achieve their goals.
Exactly. And that makes B2B sales much more fulfilling, both for the salesperson and the client. It's a win-win.
So as we wrap things up here, I think the biggest takeaway for me is this. B2B sales, it's not just about closing deals. It's about building relationships, understanding what people need, and offering real real value. It's about being that trusted advisor who helps clients face their challenges and ultimately find success.
And it's about realizing that every single interaction, from that first point of contact to everything that comes after the sale, it's all a chance to showcase your expertise, build that trust, and make a positive impact that.
So to everyone listening, next time you're in a B2B sales situation, remember everything we talked about today. Think about those different types of sale. Consider using that 𝗕𝗮𝗯 framework. And most importantly, be that trusted advisor who helps guide your clients towards a win-win outcome. Happy selling.